toxicant, 2 are interactions, including genetic interactions, and 3 are modifiers, including diet and exercise. So we know that not all smokers develop lung cancer, right? Only 10% of smokers actually develop lung cancer. Doesn't lead to the conclusion that smoking doesn't cause lung cancer. Smoking certainly causes lung cancer. You don't smoke, you're highly unlikely to get lung cancer. And indeed, in the early 1900s, there was almost no lung cancer in the United States when there was no smoking. So I think for looking at the toxicants, I think it's a matter of timing. I think children and babies and fetuses may be at most greatest risk. I think it's a function of dose, how much are they getting exposed to, and a function of duration. So a function of timing when they're exposed, how much they're exposed to, and for how long. And then there are interactions. So we know, for example, with pesticides, that if you have head trauma, your risk of getting Parkinson's disease is amplified by the synergistic effects of pesticide exposure and head trauma. So the two together amplify your risk beyond that by the disease by itself. It's likely also there are genetic risk factors. So about 15% of people in the United States carry a gene that increases their risk for Parkinson's disease. Said another way, 85% don't that we know of. But it turns out even among those who don't, that there are differences in the way some of these toxicants, especially pesticides, are metabolized that might put some individuals at higher risk for developing Parkinson's disease and may put other individuals at lower risk for developing Parkinson's disease. So we've talked one about the exposure, timing, dose, duration. Then we talked about the interactions, both environmental ones and genetic ones. And then there are modifiers. And so I think the way we can modify this is through diet and through exercise, especially the latter. Exercise likely releases growth factors in the brain that can protect the remaining nerve cells. I think a combination of those three things, toxicants, interactions, and modifiers, are the ones that determine who develops Parkinson's disease, at what rate, and what we can do to modify the disease course.
This is where it starts to get really complicated with, as you're explaining that, the genetic piece, plus say somebody played high school football and had a head injury 20 years ago.
If you're a native or fluent English-speaking expat living in Taiwan and you're looking for a new online career that enables you to
football and had a head injury 20 years ago, plus they're living in New York City above a dry cleaner, and all these different interactions and trying to sift it out and to protect against Parkinson's and other things like cancer, I can see how what we're doing here is important. We're hashing it all out and giving people their best shot at understanding these different inputs, but there is so much overlap and it gets complicated pretty quickly.
But I'll make it simple. If you don't get exposed to air pollution, if you don't get exposed to trichloroethylene, perchloroethylene, if you don't expose to toxic pesticides, your likelihood of developing Parkinson's disease is extraordinarily small. If you don't get exposed to these toxicants, your likelihood of developing Parkinson's disease is extraordinarily small. If you don't smoke and you don't get exposed to radon, you don't get exposed to really high levels of air pollution, you're just not getting lung cancer, the 90+% of lung cancer. We can stop all these diseases, the vast majority of all of these. There's always rare genetic causes and there's always exceptions. But the vast majority of diseases are fundamentally preventable. We can create a world where Parkinson's disease is increasingly rare. We can create a world where Alzheimer's is increasingly rare. We can get rid of leukemia, the vast majority of leukemia, I think, in children. We can get rid of lots of cancers in individuals by taking actions to improve our environment.
Let's move into the pesticide piece. And for me, the obvious thing that jumps out right away is to eat organic. And I'm sure that's not a perfect science. I'm sure there's, pesticides in the air and things get contaminated. But the way I think about it, that would give us our best shot at, minimizing our pesticides. So talk about first step when it comes to pesticides. Is it buying organic, or is there some bigger thing I'm missing here?
So I'll give you some very concrete things. So by the way, before I wrote this book, I didn't know anything. I didn't know about TCE. I knew very little about the relationship between pesticides and Parkinson's disease. I had the gift as an academic of a sabbatical, and I read the great work of Dr. Caroline Tanner, one of my colleagues who's a professor at University of California, San Francisco. And we owe her a huge debt of debt because she's done research over the last 25 years detailing the linkages between pesticides, especially a pesticide called paraquat, dry cleaning chemicals, including trichloroethylene, and other environmental